So when we were on your boat over the winter months down in Naples,
Yep.
we were chit-chatting about investments and stuff like that. And you told me you've only invested in like 1 or 2 stocks and you have like very little money in the stock market. Is that correct?
Relatively speaking, in terms of net worth, yes.
Correct.
Relatively low.
Correct.
I do need to maintain, every developer needs to maintain some liquidity, and every business person should maintain some liquidity. But I don't keep a ton in the stock market.
So what percentage of your net worth is invested in liquid assets? To my knowledge, that would be like stock market investments.
Or like bank accounts and all of that. Probably 15% or something. The banks require you to have some liquidity on hand, and they like it to be in deposits at their bank.
Right.
Right. So you can put some in the stock market. Most of it has to be at the banks. Maybe 15% or so,
And then what percentage of your net worth is invested in the stock market?
Ooh, I'd say less than 1%.
Okay.
Yeah. Because the market goes up and it goes down, and it's, and you can't predict, can't control it. I like to do real estate because I can control the value. I can decide when to sell,
right,
when not to sell. Stock market, you could be invested and the whole thing crashes like it did in 08. You just never know what's going to happen. I mean, you're basically gambling.
You are gambling.
Yeah. Without any control. I mean, the New Yorker's controller, right? The insiders control.
Right. Those Wall Street bastards.
Special rules for them. Like, for example, if you have a broker-dealer's license, you're getting real-time information on the stock market. But if you don't, that information is delayed to the public.
Right.
So by the time you hear about it, because you're just average Joe public, it's too late.
Right.
The insiders, they all sold, And you didn't know that. They don't tell you that, but that's what it is. That's the truth. That's the rule. So insiders, through broker-dealer licenses and networks, they have a direct link to the stock market. They know exactly what's happening in real time.
Right.
You don't. I don't.
So
we find out later.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, that's how these guys make their money. So talk about, you talked about how building wealth occurs in steps. Right? And levels and periods of time.
Right.
You also were talking about how Warren Buffett made a lot of his money.
Mm-hmm.
Explain to me how he made a lot of his money.
Well, I was trying to explain that, like, those are deals that we can't do, right? So he's big enough where when 08 came, he made a lot of money by bailing out companies. And some companies didn't even need a bailout. He was just providing the liquidity. So he'd say, I'll give you this amount of cash to get you through this rough period. But I, Warren Buffett or whatever, get a special deal, right? And that special deal might be, 1, he gets paid back at a specific time. 2, he gets a specific return, a minimum return. And 3, maybe he gets stock or options on top of that, some kind of kicker. So that's a deal. That's an insider deal. We can't get that. Only somebody with tremendous wealth, who could put cash in to a company when they hit a rough patch gets that kind of deal. So a lot of people talk about him and how he's, but the truth is a lot of that wealth was created through these insider deals that are not available to a regular person. So it's hard to compare. I personally wouldn't say that he is an entrepreneur,
Right.
He's more of a, insurance company that has a lot of cash and they use it wisely to get special deals for themselves that aren't available to the rest of us.
What insurance company does he own?
He owns there's a bunch of insurance companies.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't want to name them, but yeah.
Okay.
As part of the portfolio. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's an investor.
Yeah, exactly. Who gets special deals?
Because of his size.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And that's not available to us or the public. It's just,
I guess he raised money in the right manner to get that big that quickly.
He didn't raise money. It's the insurance premiums. So insurance companies have a ton of cash on hand from the premiums they receive, and they need to reinvest that. So they'll invest in real estate, stocks, whatever they choose, right? And until there's a claim made, and then they need to have some cash to pay the claim. And if you can reduce your claims and you keep your premiums coming in, cash piles up. Okay, what do you do with that? He very wisely uses it to get special deals for himself, not available to the stockholders of that company.
Right. So how could someone maybe do this on a smaller level in real estate.
Can, but you can. That's my point.
Or a similar
you can't
level.
aspire to that. You just have to do the hard work. You just have to go out there and build it one building at a time.
Right.
Do the hard work. I know a young guy who, he went right out of school, jumped into wanting to build a, 8-story building, I think it was, in our town. And, he sold his soul to get some money, from different parties to make that happen. And I'll place a bet that he gets nothing out of it himself. It's all an ego trip to get this giant building. Now, on the other hand, I did it a different way. I started with buying a building and rehabbing. Then I went to building a 1-story office building. Then I went and some 1-story retail buildings. Then I went to 2 stories. Then I went to 3 stories. And I literally went to a 4-story. And then I went to an 8-story. And now I'm doing a 15-story. But I worked my way up, in terms of sophistication, complication. And then you learn your hard lessons on the small projects, you're not on the big ones. And, a young guy who's going to try to go in and do some, right now, the same party's trying to do a 30-story building in a city in Wisconsin that, he's never even done a 2-story building. You know what I mean? So you got to sell your soul to get that to happen.
And what do you mean by selling soul? Like, what is that?
Well, you have to give up everything to the investors. You have to, you're not going to get much out of it yourself.
Right.
You're not going to get, maybe you get a little development fee. You're not going to get a big ownership piece, maybe they give you a token amount, right? Because the deal is so hard, so complicated, requires so much equity, so much debt that they have the leverage to take from you, right? If you really want this to go, right?
Right.
And it just becomes an ego trip for you. What good did that do you? So what I'm saying is resist the ego trip, focus on doing the hard work and building the value and the wealth for yourself.
Right.
Don't focus on the big ego trip, the flashy project.
The big building.
Yeah, the big building. Just build it in baby steps over time and work your way up. And you know what? Next thing you know, you're in your 30s, you got really nice net worth. If you're in your 40s, you're really wealthy. You've built this up. You're doing very well. It's cash flowing. You're enjoying life, versus you're worried, stressed out about, you didn't earn anything in the first deal, which took you 10 years to get done.
Right.
And now you're trying to do another one and take you another 5 to 10 years.
You're actually hurting yourself.
What are you getting? Yeah, you're setting yourself backwards.
Right.
Yeah.
So talk about, someone that wants to do, how do I want to ask this question to you, Terrence? Someone like myself, right? Mm-hmm. I own a couple rental properties. I've done a couple rehabs. I've made some small connections among some local banks.
Right.
And I want to do a deal. Mm-hmm. Let's say a recession hits. Mm-hmm. Some people get hit hard.
Right.
Where would I want to place myself, or who would I want to know to find good deals?
Well, I'd say 2 parties. One is bankers, because they know if there's a property that's going to default or is in trouble and they want to get out of it. So they might want you to come in and buy the property from the seller, who's not even a seller yet, just so their loan doesn't go in default. Right. So you want to get in early, right? The other is brokers, because brokers usually know in advance of the public about what's coming up for sale. The companies are talking to brokers about, how can we exit? What's the strategy for getting rid of this asset? What can we get for it? So those are like the 2 parties to know. I mean, but some deals you're going to walk away from. For example, I can't tell you how many deals I've walked away from and then circle back a year later and it comes back to me at a lower price.
Right.
So I bought the old United Healthcare building in Green Bay, and it was not owned by United Healthcare. They vacated 5 years earlier, the lease from a REIT, and the REIT owned it, and they were paying out $1 million a year in holding costs, for 4 or 5 years.
Wow.
And COVID comes along and all that, and it just makes it worse.
Right.
And so, the broker called me about buying it, and I offered him $10 million. Now, This is 46 acres. It's 5 stories. 400,000, almost 400,000 square feet of space. 25-year-old building, so fairly modern and in good shape. So this thing would cost you, if you built it today, it would cost you $120 million.
Wow.
And I offered $10 million. Well, you have to get it closed by the end of the year. Like, there's no way that's going to happen. That's like in 70 days. There's no way. We can't do that.
Right.
Well, so they said no, and they missed the end of the year. Then the first quarter came. Well, can you make a new offer? Make a new offer. We close by March 31st, end of the quarter. Like, I can't do that, or it's not going to happen. I need to get the approvals. I need to do the due diligence, the survey, the appraisal. It takes more than 90 days.
Right.
So we missed the first quarter. Same thing again, second quarter, June 30th. It ain't going to happen. So we went through this 3 times. And after June 30th, I just walked away. I said, I'm done.
Right.
You guys just won't get realistic.
You're wasting your time.
You just wasted 9 months of time because you keep yelling at me about getting it done in 90 days. And it's not going to happen. But had you listened to me in the first place, this would have been done back in February, after the first time we signed it, So I walked away, and then nothing happened. This October, the broker calls me and said, they're going to sell it, and they're going to put it on an online auction. They're going to put it on the auction the day after Thanksgiving weekend. Like, that's bad timing, but okay, good for me,
Right.
So, and I researched online auctions, how they work. I also looked into the possible buyers, and so I sat there. They opened the auction on Monday morning. The last day of closing would be noon on Wednesday. Of course, I'm not going to do anything till the last minute of that last day.
Right.
Somebody else puts in an offer for $1 million on Monday. Why would you do that? Like, some of the players didn't understand like how an auction works, an online auction. You don't want to stoke up the fire with gasoline when you're the guy bidding for it.
Right.
It's kind of foolish.
Right.
So not much happened. I had already done all the due diligence. I was already prepared.
Right.
In advance. And so on, 1 minute to the end of the auction on noon on Wednesday, I hit click, and okay, I'm the high bidder at that moment. But then they extended the auction another 2 minutes, which really pissed me off. So the rules were that if they feel they can do so, they can extend the auction.
Really?
Yeah, which is kind of horse crap, what I mean?
Right.
Because the purpose of having a deadline is to meet the deadline.
So did anyone make an offer within those 2 minutes?
So I had to wait an antagonizing 2 minutes. No one else made an offer, and I got a $120 million asset for $4.5 million.
Wow. And originally you were going to buy it for 10, or what were you?
Yeah, and I'd offered 10 the year before. Yeah. Now that's ironic, isn't it? So sometimes you walk away from a deal and it circles back, it comes back at you, and you get a better opportunity.
And you made $4 million.
I paid for.
No, I know. Or I'm sorry, you saved $6 million.
Yeah, but now I have 46 acres of prime land. I'm actually tearing the building down because it's too expensive to renovate. I did the whole math on that.
Yeah.
Got bids and compared it to if I tore it down, what's that cost?
Right.
Building new, and turned out that tearing it down is less expensive, which is kind of sick when you think about it. We're going to tear down a beautiful, pretty modern office building. But what do you do with it? You know what I mean? It's shaped like a donut. And so the hallways, radiate around. And how do you get apartments in there? But we'll have over 1,200 units on that site.
Wow.
So we'll have, $1 billion worth of real estate someday there.
Wow.
And I got it for $4.5 million. So there are cycles to the economy. And right now we're in a cycle where, just at the very bottom here, and it's coming back up. And that's when people tend to bail out. The companies just want to sell their assets. They're tired and exhausted from waiting, want to get out, and they dump it.
Clean up the portfolio.
Price. Yeah. So that's when you want to wait for that. You don't want to buy going into the recession. You want to wait till the economy's turned the corner. It's just starting to come out. And that's when your best deals are.
And you're saying you feel like that's what's going on right now?
Yes. Yeah. I've had 4 deals, four land parcels that I've been purchasing all of a sudden, just like that, out of the blue, weren't available or were available previously at a higher price. And now I'm getting them. I have them under contract for less money, and they're great sites, and they'll be a really nice addition to the portfolio. We can develop on them, hundreds of units each.
Thousands.
Yeah.
Because you said you have about 8,000 potential units in the pipeline?
Yeah, we have 2,000 units now, and then we have 8,000 approved units, in the pipeline going forward that we can build over the next 15 or 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what does that depend on? How much money you raise?
Yeah, we'll build out one building every other year at each site. We got to have, we have to tap into our investors, get the mortgages, put the whole deal together. But the approval's there.
Right.
We don't have to keep going back to the well to get approval.
Right.
Right. That's what I don't like to do. I don't want to get approval for one building, and then go get approval for another building. Each approval takes 3, 4, 5 years.
Wow.
I'd rather do one approval, one process, and get 10 buildings approved, or 6 buildings, or 5 buildings, and I'm done.
Right.
And now I can just build one every other year.
Right.
Without having to go back to the city.
Wow.
Yeah.
How much real estate value are the 2,000 units worth?
Well, I don't know. What gross value doesn't really matter, but let me see here. I don't know. It's hard to say. Is this a Trump value or the?
Yeah. Give us Trump value and then give us.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. It's really hard to say. $500 million.
$500 million. Okay.
Yeah.
And then how much bank debt do you have on those?
Well, it depends on each project. So when I first do the construction, I'm trying to get as much leverage as possible.
Right.
I get 75% is pretty much max. So I have to reduce, then I don't have to do as much equity.
Right.
Now, bigger projects, you can only get about 65% leverage. So bigger projects are not necessarily a better thing.
Right.
The terms are more difficult. So stick with the, 3 and 4 stories, what I do. And those are 75% leverage, 25% equity. Part of that equity is all the cash out of pocket I put in with my staff and all the services and everything that we've contributed. And then part will be cash from me and an investor group. Whoever chooses to invest in that property.
I see.
Yeah.
And is your strategy with your real estate business, I'm going to use as much OPM as possible, other people's money?
Yes. So there's a rule of thumb I have, which I always describe to people, which is if you've got under 250 units, you can manage that yourself from home, right? So that's a good number. It's manageable. You and one other person, a partner, spouse, whatever, can do that. Once you start getting up above 250 units to 1,000, you're going to have an office. You're going to have outside staff. It's going to start costing you more money. But the deal is there's not enough revenue coming in from 250 to 1,000 units to cover that extra overhead that you need, because the staff that you need to cover 500 units could cover 1,000.
Right.
But you don't have enough units to cover the revenue to pay the management fee to cover the costs.
Right.
So 250 is nice, managed from home. 250 to 1,000 is kind of what I call the death zone. And that's where it's really difficult to make the numbers work in terms of management, overhead. You just don't have enough revenue coming in.
Right.
But you have to have the staff. So I push through that as fast as possible to get to 1,000 units, because once you have 1,000 units, then you're bringing enough management fees and overhead. You're covering the field costs, and to cover the staff that you need to make it happen.
Right.
So you want to get through the death zone, get to 1,000 units, and then you're off and running, because now you have more and more revenue, and your staff is pretty efficient. They're able to cover more units without adding more employees.
Right. Way more efficient. Yeah. And you're saying a couple could manage 250 units, like not
from home.
From home, like you're saying managing the property managers?
Yeah,
or
they do the leasing. They would do.
They would do the leasing.
Yeah, they would do the management. They pay the bills themselves, right? Instead of having an outside accountant to come in or an accounting employee, they can do all that at home, and fairly easily. It's a software, can keep their overhead low.
And then, but what if they have to show? What if they have to show 20 apartments in a weekend?
Well, sometimes what they do is they'll hire interns for the summer.
Okay.
Or they have adult children who are in high school or college will help fill in.
Okay.
Like a farm, a farm family kind of, right? The kids will help fill in, do some of the work. By the time they get to the 250, their kids are probably a little older, and old enough in high school or something, middle school, to help show a unit.
Wow. That seems like so much to me, but I'm an East Coaster.
But, I've seen that. I've seen lots of couples do that, to manage.
No way.
Yeah. And then you either got to stay there, or if you're going to become bigger, then you better
get
enough units to make that happen before you take that big leap and start adding overhead. Because now you're going to have an accountant, right? You're going to have additional staff for leasing and property managing, a maintenance team. So, maybe a truck, the overhead starts ballooning. And so there's a big jump there. Yeah.
Wow. Self-managing 250 units. I can't get past that. I'm gonna have to.
It's not that hard. That's
because you grew up in this, like, when a tenant's about to fuck you or something like that, or
well, I'm not that close to that part of it anymore. I have a director of property management who, takes care of all that.
Right.
But yes, there are clues to that. Yes, especially the commercial tenants. I've had tenants bail out literally in the middle of the night, would pack up and move their commercial business because it was failing.
Right.
And leave shop, not pay their rent. No. The irony is they probably wouldn't have had to pay the rent anyways if they'd just come talk to me.
Right. And just worked out a plan.
Worked out a transition plan. Yeah. So I could, I'll fill the space up,
But now we're going to take them to court and get what we can because
I get a judgment. And this one, I had one young couple, I felt bad, but they left in the middle of the night. If they'd come to me and talked to me, we would have worked out a plan. They would have gotten off the hook on the remainder of the lease. I would have refilled it. But instead, they took off in the middle of the night. I got a judgment because they didn't show up to court.
Right.
And it was like 10 or 15 years later, and they were calling me, hey, we need to have that judgment removed. We were buying a house. We need the mortgage, and they won't give us the mortgage and close on the house.
Cool. Here's my routing number.
That's what I said.
Here's my account number.
I said, pay it off.
The fucker? What do people think sometimes?
And the lawyer called me, well, what kind of discount? I'm not giving any discount.
Right.
You obviously need to have this closed and paid in order to get your mortgage. So I'm not doing, and you left in the middle of the night.
Discount?
So, yeah, they wanted a discount.
Discount?
No.
How about interest?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said. Yeah.
Interest accrued or whatever.
I've foregone that earnings on that. Right. Yeah. And so it's always best to work it out with your landlords.
So you started working at the age of what?
Originally, age 11.
With the Campbell soup cans, right?
Age 11, the newspapers. And fourth grade was, collecting Campbell soup labels around the neighborhood, selling ropes and wreaths from the Boy Scouts.
Doing all that. Then in high school, consulting services for IT.
Right.
Buying your first, being a real estate agent, buying your first property from the bank.
Right.
Going through the stages of success or wealth, whatever we want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
What has been probably your richest experience in your life, given the result of your hard work and success?
Oh, and what do you mean richest experience? What
could be a vacation with your family. It could be a moment you had with a group of people. I mean, it could be an item you bought that gave you joy.
I would say, I'm a kind of a pickup truck kind of guy, right? I don't need the fancy car, or, I do have a nice boat, but, and a nice RV. But, I would say, if you're working hard and you're building wealth, what money or wealth can give you is freedom.
Yes.
And so to me, every day is the freedom to be able to do what I want on my schedule when I want. I don't have to work on somebody else's schedule. I don't go to somebody else's office. I go to my office, and there's the pride of that. I will say this. I would say, to answer you in a more specific manner, is I built an industrial park. And when you are a developer and you build the roads, you get to name the streets. And so I had a ribbon cutting, to grand opening, ribbon cutting, all the employees, bank, everybody, contractors, all that. And I didn't tell my dad. I invited him, but I didn't tell him what I had a little surprise for him, which was at the ribbon cutting, I was announcing the name of the streets.
Oh.
And one of those streets I named after him, John Wall Drive. And it was right alongside a highway. So as I told everybody in the audience, I said, it's always been John Wall's Way or the highway.
Ah.
And, but it was, naming a street after him. I also have another office park where I named a street Wall Street. That's my name. Obviously a obvious name. In fact, the irony of that story was that I went into the city with the plat and the staff member said, you can't name a street after yourself. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. This is an office park. Wall Street's an iconic name.
Right.
What is your problem?
Right.
And, well, you can't name a street after yourself. You can only name it after somebody who passed away. And I snapped my finger and said, that's right. I forgot. I didn't name this after me. I named it after my grandfather.
Right.
And he rolled his eyes and says, all right, you got me, and signed off on the plat.
Good.
But, just doing something for my dad like that, be able to name a street after him that he knew would last, well, hopefully for 100, 200 years.
Right.
It was a very moment of pride you can see in his eyes, that no one else could give him that but me.
Right.
And I think that was, to have that power and freedom to be able to do that was, I think, I just remember that day.
Probably inspirational.
Yeah. So that's something unique you get to do when you're a developer. You get to name streets.
Right.
You get to watch the school bus go through your neighborhood that you created.
Right.
And picking up kids. And those kids wouldn't be there if it weren't for you.
Right. Making those curbs.
Right.
Putting in that stormwater.
Right. But they live there because of what you did. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. And no one else did that.
Let's dive deeper into the freedom. Like you would call it freedom.
Yeah.
And young bucks like myself.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it I think money and wealth and maybe some success kind of helps you, gives you maybe that fuck you attitude where like, not that I'm saying fuck you to people. I'm just saying like, hey, I can.
The ability to walk away.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
The optionality, the freedom, all right, well, like, I don't care about that problem where maybe it's a $2,000 problem that people used to go crazy over.
Right.
Where guys like yourself wouldn't even see that problem.
Right.
Or just the mentality. So for instance, we walked into here.
Yeah.
Right. And guys, my own friends, myself even might wait a year or two to buy a gun. You pick it up, you look at it. All right, that's the one I want. Let's go do this podcast.
Right. Yeah. So that freedom is it's not about purchasing things, but it's about the ability to do what you want when you want. So I have the ability to go, and I love jumping in the RV, and I love driving out to national parks and hiking the national parks. And I can work, I got Starlink, so I can work from the RV.
Right.
So I'll go hiking in the morning when it's cooler, and I'll do maybe a little work in the afternoons, when it's hotter. I'll go on a boating trip, on Lake Michigan to Lake Huron, up into Canada by boat in the North Channel, Georgian Bay, a 10-day trip, go fishing, kayaking, and I'm still working, on those trips. But I have the freedom to be able to do that and see the country, see all these grand monuments and these incredible places.
Right.
Be able to go to Philmont Scout Ranch and see a grizzly bear.
Yeah.
Have a black bear in your camp, literally in the tree, 30 feet from where you're sleeping,
Keep Lambo away from it.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a freedom to, what's the point of working hard if you aren't, and building up some worth? Obviously you want to do that for retirement.
Right.
But really it's about the freedom you're going to get from that.
Right.
You still got to work, and you still got to follow through and push forward. You can't just stop.
Yeah.
I think that's a reason for, why else would you, if you're just building up dollars so you can die rich, what good does it do you?
Right. Without those experiences and relationships.
Yeah. I've done some philanthropical things, just for fun, just to give back.
Right.
I donated the land for the Boy Scout headquarters, and I actually developed and built the headquarters, and in our county, in our district, and got a national store into that. And so we have this brand new Scout headquarters, with our name on it. My dad's very proud of that.
Wow.
But it was something I did because I was a Boy Scout. I'm an Eagle Scout. So I want to give something back. I was Scout Council president for a while. And they needed this new facility. I helped merge the two districts into one, hire a new Scout executive. I built the children's carousel building at the children's zoo. They couldn't get it done. Nobody could make it happen. And my sort of inspiration for that was, Trump and building the ice rink in New York.
Terrence, I was thinking about that in my head. I was like, that sounds very similar to what Trump did at the ice rink in
it's very similar. They couldn't get it done.
Central Park. And he would sit there and watch it from his office and feel bad for the children and his daughter that wanted to go ice skating.
So I did that with the children's zoo when the director called me. But I was actually ice skating at Tenney Park. This old 75-year-old shelter building was just dumpy, and I'm looking around and I'm thinking, it's time for a new building. So I just hired an architect on my own. I designed a new shelter, the biggest shelter in the county. It even has a bridal room in it for brides if they do weddings. And I took that to the neighborhood group, sold them on the idea. I said, I'll donate all the plans. I'll donate some cash. We'll get some others to donate money.
Right.
And we'll go to the city and they'll put in money, to match this. And we'll build this new shelter, where the ice skating occurs in Madison.
Right.
At Tenny Park. There's a lagoon, so there's a big ice skating rink there on the lagoon. So the neighborhood went for it. The city and the mayor went for it.
Right.
And next thing you know, in 2011, there's a brand new, beautiful shelter building. My dad had actually decided to make a large donation also, in addition to all the other donors. And so he was able to get his name on that. And, he's very proud of that. That's sort of his legacy was leaving that, his name on that shelter building.
Yeah.
But we built this beautiful new shelter that's still in great shape today.
Yeah.
And, all the kids go in there and they go out, put on their skates, they go out ice skating, they have weddings there. None of that would have happened if it weren't for me putting that together.
Your time, effort, and money and resources and your sacrifice early on.
Right. Yes. Right. Couldn't have done that if I hadn't worked hard.
Right.
First of all, to get there.
So now that you're at this point in your career, I'm very curious, not that you're old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I want to line you up for this answer.
Yeah.
This point in your career, with the experience and wisdom you have, what are some of your aspirations and goals, right? We see guys like Donald Trump I don't even know how old he is, mid-70s, and he's pushing the needle every single day.
Yeah.
The energy this guy has, I look at it and say, how does he do it?
Yeah, I don't know.
What are some of your goals and aspirations for the next 20, maybe 30 years?
Well, fun things like I want to go see all the national parks, so I want to do that. But I have this portfolio of approved, units.
Right.
So I continue to develop that and get my staff to a point where they can do phase 3, 4, 5, 6 without a lot of my input. It's kind of try to make it more cookie cutter.
Right.
Build up a portfolio, and then, someday when I pass away, that portfolio is going to help primarily fund 2 foundations. One to help do public things, whether it's the park shelter or a town square or something.
Or possible school.
A school. Yes. So one of my big aspirations right now is I would like to build a conservative school in our town, which is...
Can you build one out here too?
No, thanks.
I'll help build the curriculum for it.
Yeah, right. Actually, after this, I'm going to meet with the president of Hillsdale College in Michigan to talk about building the relationship and starting a satellite school. They have different programs you can select from in terms of the relationship with Hillsdale College.
Right.
But I want the school to focus on family business.
Right.
So there's no one out there, no school, nothing out there right now that I'm aware of in the country that is focused on helping the next generation understand to operate and run the family business and how to make that transition. I've seen so many families make mistakes. The parents making a mistake of, putting in all the kids equally into the business when only, one works there and the other 2 don't. And there's battles and fights and, and so I want, both the parents and the children to have the opportunity to learn about how to run the family business, what makes it tick, the numbers.
Right.
My dad started off working for somebody else, and then he bought the business that he was working for.
Right.
And so turned it into, he didn't say a family business. It was business first, family second, in the sense of, the business has to survive and thrive first. You can't put the family ahead of the business or you'll be cannibalizing the golden goose.
Right.
But he wanted to see the family, come together and coalesce. And he basically set up a committee to run his business. And he'd actually asked me to run the business. And I'm like, I'm not doing this for 10% because I'm one of 10.
Right.
My brother died.
Right.
11 went to 10. But, I'm not going to work as a slave for the rest of my life for my siblings for 10%.
Right.
Give me 51% or I'll buy it, and pay you back in debt, over time. but I'm not doing this for 10%.
Right.
I mean, so I exited. I got out. I didn't want to be part of that. I don't have anything to do with that. I don't receive any benefits from that anymore. I don't get anything from that.
Well, let's
and there's a lot of, this going on.
Yeah.
So I want to avoid that for future generations of families. I want them to help understand like a lot of my siblings, they didn't understand the numbers of the family business, right? And as a result, there was some fraud going on and some other bad stuff going on that I had to get in there and help fix. And we got it fixed, but still, that didn't have to happen. If we could teach people who aren't in business about what the numbers mean and how to look at things and
education. Yes. And that's what I've tried to do with my coaching program, CMG University, as far as at least in the home service space.
Yeah.
Because once you know the numbers, it's the foundation that can get you to grow your business, to make profit, to then build wealth for yourself and, build an even bigger foundation.
Right.
But let's go into this, Terrence, because this is partly why I do my social media. And I think you'll find more reasons as we produce more content.
Mm-hmm.
It's not only about like, hey, Chase has a challenge and I want to get a 100-unit portfolio or XYZ. It's actually showing the people that follow me, hey, like here's what I've been through and here's how I've overcome these things and I'm continuing to push forward. Just being with you this today and the other times we've hung out, very similar to myself. You've been through a lot of health issues, young, at a young age.
Right.
And not only that, you've been through family. I don't even want to call it drama because it's way more than that.
Well, it is drama. It's more drama.
Well, it's trauma too. Like
a lot of drama.
You've experienced crazy lawsuits in your life, and
sure everyone does.
I've been through like small landlord tenant things, and it takes up a lot of time and anger where you want to rip people out of their houses.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you keep doing what you're doing, and you can kind of show people, hey, there's always a path to moving forward.
Right. Yeah. If you could create this. If I can create this school and the generations of families can learn from this and have a smoother transition and have a plan to go forward with that is better for the overall business, right? So it survives rather than having to be sold and divided up because
private equity
siblings can't get along, you know what I mean? Then hopefully I've done my job with helping those future generations go forward. Because America goes back to my strong belief in the United States of America, the Constitution, because America won't exist if small business doesn't exist.
Right.
It'll just be the European model of big corporations, a very few of them, in partnership with the government. That's what Europe is, primarily. And if we don't have small business, we won't have a United States. And so the key is to keep small business going. And
I love that.
In order to do that, we got to help families children understand how to keep that business going. Family farmers, right? A lot of the children don't want to go into the family farm business, and I don't blame them. It's hard.
It's very hard.
A lot of hard work, a lot of long hours, and how
a lot of variables to that business.
Yeah, they take on debt, and they can't be sure of paying it back. So how can we help them through that, process? Don't get me wrong. There are family networking groups out there and, they have speakers and all this, but I'm talking about like training the children in grade school and high school.
Yes.
Right.
Making them small business ninjas by the time they graduate high school.
Right. They set up a small business in high school. They, understanding money, understanding how to, handle a check, how to reconcile a checkbook, how to calculate a home mortgage and the debt service, which, kids come out of college state, they don't know how to calculate debt service on a home mortgage.
Right.
How is that possible for you to have a 4-year degree and not know that?
Right. Like they don't even know what debt to income ratio is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're just not being taught this,
Well, I think that goes back to like where you're at in this point and your next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, what you can accomplish with these schools, your foundations, maybe even politics, things like that.
Yeah.
You have a lot of opportunity now that you have the experience, wisdom, and backing.
Right. I'll give an example. When I was redeveloping the downtown of city of Middleton, which is next to Madison.
Right.
I bought 6 buildings. I tore them down. I redeveloped, more density, more units, everything, some retail. And then it was actually my architect's idea, and he suggests I buy the 4 homes across the street because the city didn't have a downtown, doesn't have a focal point. So when they had an event, they would close up a street, and you just have the event in the street, and, Madison, we have our state capitol and the grounds around it. That's our focal point, right? But Middleton didn't have anything. So I thought this would be a great idea. So I bought those 4 homes. I got on the backhoe myself and tore them down, at the back.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It's a requirement. Whenever I tear down a farmhouse, I get to tear it down with the backhoe.
I like
it's
that.
the funnest thing ever if you ever get a chance.
No, I've done it.
Put a big backhoe into the front of a house.
Yes.
Pull it off. So I tore those down, and then I went to the city and got approvals for creating a town square. So, a traditional town square around a park in the middle, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I was already building the town square, but we didn't have a town square center.
Right.
We didn't have a park. So it took some effort, surprisingly. I was a little surprised at how much effort it took. They were against it because it was my idea. That was honestly what happened at first. But eventually one of the staff members got on board, and then she got others on board, and they raised some money. I donated some. And we now have our town square with a band shell, some sculptures, a fire pit, park space. So you can sit and enjoy a band or a movie night or jazz night. They have all kinds of events there all summer long.
Right.
So what I created was not just a town square, but I created an event space where all summer long they're having events, bringing people into downtown, and it's changed the whole dynamic of the entire city.
Who owns that park? You do?
The city.
Oh.
Yeah. The city owns it. So I donate a piece, and donors put up money. City put up some money.
And now they're generating revenue from this.
Not really, not a lot or anything.
Okay.
It's mainly to get people into the city, And if they come into the city, maybe they'll shop, maybe they'll go to a restaurant.
Right.
It's benefiting the city. The people live there now on the apartments. They overlook a town square. That's a good thing, right?
Right.
So, and it showed people you can do a lot more than you think. You got to have a bigger vision.
Yes.
And they didn't realize that at the first, right? Now people are like, oh, hasn't that been here forever? They think it's been there for 100 years.
Well, and I'm sitting here at 24 listening to some of the projects you're doing now, and I'm like, holy cow, how is this guy doing it?
Mm-hmm.
How would you say you're doing it now? I have my prediction of, hey, well, Terrence did how many single-story buildings, then a number of two-story, and built confidence and repetition like a muscle.
Right. Yeah.
And then
we have a box that we operate within.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like 3 or 4 stories over a concrete podium, garage, wood frame construction.
Okay.
We like to be in the, 50 units was too small, and it resulted in a high cost per unit. Getting to be more than 100 units gets to be difficult to lease in one season. So I like our sweet spot is sort of 75 to 100 units in a building per phase. In a single year, we can lease that up, fill it up, and have a cash flow. So that's kind of our box. Occasionally I'll do something, I'm looking at doing this 15-story tower in downtown. I bought a 12-story office building, tore it down. It's sitting there waiting now. And the result has been, it's so difficult, much bigger debt, much more equity required, just different code requirements, more cost per foot. It's so difficult. And it kind of reminds me, stick with the box that I've developed, right? That I can just keep repeating without too much stress,
Right.
The 15 stories caused me a lot of stress. Hopefully we'll pull it off, but I'm not going to repeat that.
You're not going to do it again?
No.
In today's world, right? Say you're Chase Gallagher.
Mm-hmm.
Say Chase Gallagher wanted to be a real estate mogul or developer.
Mm-hmm.
How would you get started in today's world?
So it's a lot more difficult, I will admit. You're not going to get 100% loan. You're going to best get 75%. You don't have, maybe you do, but other people don't have credit. So not going to be able to get a loan.
Right. They don't have a track record like you do.
Right.
So it's going to be hard to get investors.
So how do you get started? How do you get a track record? I think you got to get some friends and family to invest with you. But in order to do that, don't go for the capital first. Go for the property first. Find a property that you can renovate like I did. Buy an old property, renovate it, get some family and friends to invest in that without a bank loan, kind of like what you were doing. And then next step, you can go, okay, now I'm going to do a little larger property. Maybe I'll get a small mortgage on it.
Right.
Like maybe 50% loan, the value. So don't leverage it up. right? Still get some family and friends money or some other third-party investors that you know to invest with you. Make some money, pay the investors back, pay the loan, off, right? Eventually. I actually one time took out a loan for no reason at all, just to build credit.
I did the same thing.
So, and I built credit. I paid the loan off early, deliberately, so that was a positive with that bank.
Right.
And after that, they were willing to make me loans, right? I didn't need the loan.
Right.
And so, but I did it just so I could build credit.
I just did that with my land property that you helped me out on.
Yeah, yeah.
I pulled out $350,000.
Yeah.
I didn't have any immediate need for that,
right.
But I moved then my current cash into the stock market, which you might not like that, but I moved it into the market.
Right.
So now I have X amount of liquid assets amongst my brokerage accounts, and both of the accounts have pledged asset lines on them, but not used.
Okay.
And then I took that $350 and put it in a high yield savings at that bank. Yeah. And that's what I was going to use to, develop my current real estate, the 32 acres,
right.
Or, buy a value add apartment building, like something juicy enough.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
Well, you leveraged the 32 acres.
Yes, sir.
For that purpose.
Yeah.
And it's okay to take on debt to create a development. That's normal. It gets a little risky to do it up front unless, because you're eventually going to need a first mortgage. You're going to have to pay this off. Maybe you pay it off with the first mortgage.
Right.
Right. So you're taking a pre-development loan effectively.
Yeah.
And then you can use those funds to help get the planning done, architecture, engineering, all that. And then maybe you bring in your investors, right? You pay off that loan, you get a first mortgage for construction. That all works. Yes. It does take a lot of juggling, but it can work.
Right. So if someone wanted to invest in your deals, right? You have over 800 investors?
Yes. Yeah.
You have over 800 investors amongst your $500 million portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
If someone wants to invest alongside of you and do these types of deals, what do they have to be? What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. Well, one, they got to have some excess cash, right? Technically, under the law, they should be what's called an accredited investor.
Okay.
So it's with an A, accredited. What that basically means in layman's terms is, as an accredited investor, the law is basically recognizing that you have enough wealth and sophistication that you can make your own informed decision, and that you don't need to rely on what I'm telling you. Right. That you're smart enough that you should be asking the right questions, and you can afford the loss, so to speak.
Right.
Right. That's what an accredited investor is. Legally, they have to have like an income over 200 grand. I think joint over 300 grand, board net worth over $1 million. And then there's a bunch of other, little things. So it's basically, you need to have some excess cash that you can afford to lose.
Right.
Right. Now, the irony of this is, I don't necessarily agree with this, but we have to follow those rules.
I was going to ask you about this.
It's because any moron can invest in the stock market or in the bond market.
Yep.
And there's no requirement for accredited investors. And that's pure gambling. When I have an investor invest, they're investing in a business, a real physical asset.
Yep.
Not a piece of paper traded on Wall Street.
Yes.
And they're building real wealth. That property will have real value, and why that is separated out, I'm convinced it's just because of, typically Wall Street would make rules for everyone else, so they don't have to follow.
Why? Because how you could look at it being an accredited investor, this whole law, how it's set up.
Yeah.
Well, technically, you're not giving those opportunities to people that
it's restricted. So
it's very restrictive to, hey, rich people, you are allowed to invest in these types of deals.
But no one else. So middle income people cannot. Now, you could say, you should be allowed, right? We should say, well, why not? Why can't middle income be allowed to invest? Well, we did say that in Wisconsin, and one of my business partners and I, helped write the law, and it's called certified investors. So it's a step down from accredited. Oh. And in Wisconsin, if you do a certain offering, you could accept certified investors, smaller amounts. I think you're capped at 5,000 or 10,000 for an investment. So it's a smaller amount that an investor can afford to lose, and they have to have a certain net worth, but not as much as an accredited. So it's kind of like a tiered methodology. I think that's a great idea. I think that's a fair thing to do. You're limiting the risks the person is taking, and they can build up their portfolio, but they can also build up their brain power about how to make these investments. And then maybe they become an accredited investor later, and they can invest more. Right.
So let's say they are an accredited investor.
Yep.
what does it look like if they want to invest alongside of you? Do you have minimums? How long does the process take? Can they sign a couple pieces of paper and wire you money?
Yeah. So, yes.
Okay, perfect.
So there's a minimum investment, typically $25,000.
Okay. What does your average investor invest?
Well, think of a pyramid of, I don't mean it in a negative sense, but the bulk of people are 25, 50,000. Some are at 75, 100, a few at 250, and then a few at $1 million.
I see.
Right. And that's overall. Now, each project will have a different set of investors.
Okay.
Right. One investor may say, I like Madison, Middleton, whatever, but I don't want to invest in La Crosse or Wausau.
Right.
Or I like this, but I don't like that. So you pick and choose. And then they have to be given the PPM or the private placement memorandum. So we spent about $15,000 writing that. That's all the risks. The world is coming to an end. That's what it basically says.
Is that per project?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
You have to do each one. Yeah. Now it's a repetition, right? So basically 90% of it's similar.
Just same. Edit. Yeah.
And then you sign a subscription agreement. That's, you actually sign 3 times. So nobody can say, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. No, you signed 3 times, buddy.
Right.
And it spells out all the, accredited terms that you have to meet. Right. And then they write a deposit, $1,000. And then later we'll call the capital. So once we get everybody signed up, no point in holding your money, leave it in the bank. And then within 3 or 6 months, depending on when everyone's signed up, we issue a call for capital, and then you have to turn your capital in within 30 days.
Question for you, Terrence.
Yeah.
If someone's a real estate professional investing alongside of you, and let's say they're a big time investor, they say, hey, Terrence, I want to put $1 million towards this project. Are you legally allowed to give them more depreciation than $1 million within that calendar year if they are a real estate professional?
So, okay, there's regular accredited investors only get to use the amount of depreciation up to the amount they invested. So if they invested $100,000, they get $100,000 of depreciation over the time period that you're allocating it. They get their pro rata share up to $100,000. Once they hit zero, $100,000 down to zero, then it stops, right? They can't go negative. Developers can go negative. There's one other case. You could have, like you said, a credit investor who, let's say they agree to sign on the loan. So they're on the hook for the loan as well, let's say. Then I believe they can go negative. But it's not a good idea. I even told my accountant, look, don't go negative on my basis without telling me and getting my authorization, because I don't want the recapture. So when we sell, if I'm at negative $1 million, now there's what's called recapture. So that you have to declare a gain up to $1 million to zero, and then you have to declare the gain above that. So now the gain may be huge, but you're only getting this many dollars, but the tax gain is this, and now the taxes are this. It could wipe out all the cash you're receiving if you're not careful. So going negative basis is not necessarily a good idea. A lot of developers do that. And as a result, they have to keep trading, doing 1030 exchanges forever until they die.
Right.
Because they can't afford to pay the taxes. They've dug that hole so deep, right? They can't get themselves out of the hole. Very dangerous. I don't recommend that. I don't even want to do it for myself, Now I have loss carry forwards. That's unused depreciation. Right. So I have depreciation in a bucket. If I don't use it, I pour it in a bucket, keep the bucket, and then let's say I sell a property, empty that bucket out and apply all of those loss carry forwards to the gain to basically reduce the amount of taxes owed on that one sale.
Right.
So it's a tax strategy.
What do you think about a strategy? This is one that I implement, and I want to get your honest thoughts. I know you say, hey, don't accelerate depreciation. I mean, I don't want to put words.
No, I do that.
Okay.
We use accelerated depreciation.
Right.
Yeah.
One strategy I use is because I'm a real estate professional, I'll cost seg a property or two when I buy them that year.
That's what we do.
You
should do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, let's say that depreciation runs out in about 5 years.
Okay.
What I try and do is upfront as much depreciation as I as I can that year. I'll usually have some carry forward for the next year.
Right.
But what I'm not doing is spending the money that I would have saved on my federal taxes. I usually take that money and I'm always investing it year over year to give me a return.
Sure. Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Our depreciation, we usually get it done within the bulk of it 7 to 12 years, and then some residual through 15. There's always a tail, of course, but most of it comes within 7 to 12 years.
Okay.
But yes, you can use that, to save on taxes.
That's a good strategy, right?
Exactly. But you have to be a real estate professional, meet 5 tests to do that.
Right.
Not just regular people. They can't do that.
Correct. If you have a W-2, you cannot do that. You got to be like us in the real estate business.
So many hours every year that you spend, and you're at risk on the loan, and you have an ownership interest and all of that.
Managing people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a good strategy. I mean, I haven't paid I haven't paid income taxes in years, but I'm the number one property taxpayer in our city.
Right. You're really trading it.
So it's just, you're just paying tens of millions of dollars in property taxes instead of paying it in income tax, which is good for the community because it's all going to the local instead of the federal government disappearing, and you're not getting any benefit from it.
Right.
So it's better. I feel it's better to
And guys like yourself are actually producing the local cities way more tax revenue with these development projects.
Yes. Yeah. I took the city of Middleton's downtown, the properties that we bought downtown, which was the core of the downtown, it's assessed at only $4.5 million. And when I was done with the new properties, it assessed over $75 million. So the tax base went from, the mill rate on $4.5 million to the mill rate on $75 million. That's a huge increase. You know what I mean? In the taxes the city and the school district receive. Right? So there's a huge benefit to development to the local community.
Let's look at the current real estate scene and think about some opportunities for individuals that want to invest or maybe have a portfolio. Like something like what I think about sometimes in the past couple months is, all right, well, now that I've established a portfolio of real estate, I have renters, I have debt at 7.25, 8%, 6.2, 5s. I'm looking forward to the end of this year, possibly next year, to maybe get rates down a little bit, maybe to low 5s, high 4s. And
You're dreaming.
Okay, so you don't think that's going to happen?
And that's not going to happen.
Okay. What do you think rates will go down to?
Well, I have just from a perspective, I have an economics degree, and I've been watching the economy since high school.
Okay.
And watching interest rates, watching the Fed, reading up history of the Fed. I'm really into the economy. I predicted accurately the Great Recession in 2008. I predicted the technology stock market crash of 2000. And these are not difficult to predict. If you know what to look for. And right now we have a situation. Let's start with going back history a little bit. So if you look at the economic booming periods in our country, when did they occur? Occurred during President Coolidge, President Kennedy, President Reagan, and Trump. Now, what were the common factors in that? And what's stunning to me,
low rates?
Lower interest rates.
Okay.
Yes, and low income tax rates. So these booming periods all occurred after a bust period where what was associated with the bust period? High interest rates and high income tax rates.
Yeah.
So, the income tax didn't come into play until 1913. They jacked it all the way up to literally, it was 70%. When Coolidge became president, he knocked that down. I think it was by 25% or something. He knocked a big chunk off of that. What happened in the Great Recession? If FDR raised income tax rates, the marginal rates up to 91%. Plus you had other taxes you had to pay. You got almost no income. You were working for the government. Most of your income was taken from you in taxes, And what happened after 1929? They always try to blame Hoover for 1929, the stock market crash. No, the stock market was over leveraged. There were none of the rules that there are today. A lot of debt was taken on in order to invest in the stock market, which means when the market blipped down a little bit, margin calls, people panicked. That's why the market crashed. It wasn't the tariffs. There's been tariffs. Coolidge had tariffs. There was no impact, no negative impact at all.
Right.
Okay. It was high interest rates and high income tax rates that caused every recession of the last century. Look at Kennedy. He took the 90% income tax rates down to 70%. And the economy took off. Interest rates are low. The Fed, on the other hand, during 1929, responded to the stock market crash by tightening the levers, tightening the money supply, and raising interest rates, which exacerbated the whole problem, right? You don't tighten the money supply when you have an economic crisis. You loosen it. You throw money out the helicopter, right? That's what they call it.
And then to slow down inflation, you raise rates.
Well, if things are plunging, you don't need to worry about inflation.
Right.
You're going to have deflation.
Right.
So Kennedy lowered rates, the economy took off. Reagan took them from 70% down to 50%, and then eventually took them to 28 and 15%.
Good.
And the economy took off. Interest rates came down. He got interest rates down. He got income tax rates down, and he got the price of oil down by sending George Bush over to the Middle East.
Yeah.
You get the Saudis to pump more oil. We got oil prices down, and the economy took off. Every time we've gone into a recession, what's happened? Interest rates have gone up, tax rates have gone up, and that takes more money from the people. And the government is vacuuming up your money, and you don't have the money to spend, so the economy slows down.
Right.
So what they should be doing right now, the Fed, should stop fighting against the president. They should be lowering interest rates. If they're worried about tariffs having an impact negatively on the economy, then lower interest rates, right? And Trump's going to do what he can by renewing his tax cuts. So we're going to have low taxes again. If we could get interest rates down, this economy will take off.
Right.
But the Fed is deliberately working against him. Now, note that behavior is different than the Fed under Powell, where he worked glove in hand
with Biden,
right, to overinflate the economy and to print $6 trillion of additional capital for $6 trillion more spending by the government.
And you know what's happening? Just so here's how I look at it. They're printing money to send to Ukraine or whatever projects they want.
Or the special
Why they
group.
raise rates to slow down Americans, because now we pay more on our car loans, on our home loans, on our credit cards.
Yes.
And so
they're inflating the money supply, at the same time raising interest rates, punishing the private sector, thinking, the private sector caused inflation. No, the Federal Reserve Bank caused the inflation by printing the money, the $6 trillion that we spent. Not we, but Biden. And that caused inflation, with the government competing. When I couldn't build new construction because the government was going out and buying up all the contractors' time and all the skilled labor out there. There was nothing left. I couldn't possibly pay the prices the government was paying. And so I couldn't compete. So I didn't build.
Last 4 years?
Yeah, during the Biden term, after COVID.
Okay.
Right? When they shoveled all that money out the door.
Okay.
The government was paying whatever price they needed to get the contractors to build schools, government buildings, roads, whatever. And so there was nothing left for the private sector. It was too expensive to build apartments. So we waited, right? But we didn't cause inflation. The Fed and the government caused inflation. So
because they control the games.
Right. So they worked hand in hand with Biden not to create the mess. Now they're working against Trump to try to fix the mess. You know what I mean? Which is ironic. I mean, they should be lowering interest rates. They're keeping interest rates higher than they need to be.
Right.
The economy's already slowing down. That's very clear. And there's going to be a transition period during this time when Trump works the levers to get back to where we need to be, to tweak the tariffs. We're getting screwed. The United States, Americans here are paying.
Yes.
I don't know if people understand this. All these countries, Canada, Mexico, Europe, they all charge American goods outrageous tariffs.
Yeah.
The Canadian tariff on dairy products from Wisconsin is 240%.
What?
Yeah, 240%. Yeah. And no one knows that, right? It's been reported recently. But the point is, they have these enormously high tariffs that we pay their tariffs, right? And guess what's really happening? Those governments are they've become addicted like heroin to those tariffs.
Yes.
They are living off the American taxpayer that is supporting those governments, Europe, Canada, Mexico at our expense. And then they play this game of like being holier than thou. Oh, well, you can't raise your tariffs, America, on our goods, because if you do that, we're going to raise our tariff. Wait a second. If we hit you with the 25% tariff and you're charging us 240%, what are you going to do? Raise it to 300?
Right.
What are you going to do?
Right.
You know what I mean? By the way, we don't need their stuff. Right. We don't need all that Chinese crap. Okay, that cheap Chinese crap. We don't need that.
Leave it overseas.
They do need our stuff. Yeah. Our intellectual property. Right. Our technology. Europe isn't inventing technology. It's all dependent on America. They need us and they need our goods and our products. We don't need them. We are self-sufficient. So we can raise those tariffs to equalize their tariffs. And hopefully that will motivate them to lower their tariffs.
Right.
And then we'll bring our stuff.
Right.
But the Fed is really, really going about this wrong. They're so worried about signing up for their him/her emails on their emails, choosing their genders. I'm not kidding you. A Fed governor told me this. They were required to choose their gender for their emails. Meanwhile, the economy is going to hell. Right? What should you be focusing on here? Right? So Biden's appointees have taken over the Federal Reserve, Federal Open Market Committee.
Not now, but previously?
Previously, yeah.
Right.
Well, no, they're still in control.
Oh, okay.
Because they have terms.
Okay. When does this term end?
So the chairman's term ends I think it's January or February next year.
Oh, nice. Okay.
But in my opinion, the Congress should pass a law to get the chairman's term coterminous with the presidential term. It is ridiculous.
I agree.
That a new president has to wait a year to get a new chairman of the Fed because if the current chair, like Chairman Powell, refuses to cooperate and refuses to do the right thing, to help correct the economy, and yet they bent over backwards to do whatever Biden wanted, there's something really wrong here.
So some people say, and I was listening to this podcast called All In Podcast. I need you to listen to these guys in your drive home.
Okay.
They're billionaires in the tech industry, and they're like four dudes just like us sitting in this room.
Okay.
They talk about poker nights all the way from the economy. Yeah. David Sachs is one of the co-hosts there, and he's also the crypto guy that's next to Trump in the DC right now.
Okay.
And they say, hey, Jerome Powell isn't listening to Trump.
Right.
But Trump's going to get what he wants, and that's why this tariff talk's in place, and that's why the stock market has taken a pretty big dip over the past month. Mm-hmm. Because what happens, usually the Fed says, oh, everyone gets worried, and the stock market keeps dipping, and then they adjust.
Yeah.
So people think
need a period of adjustment.
Right.
Yeah.
For investors and smart people and opportunity guys like you and I, we look at it as an opportunity.
The irony is if Powell and the FOMC would lower interest rates, the economy would take off. But they have misdirected what they believe to be their charge. And their charge is not to control the economy. They are not the Politburo of the Soviet Union to control the economy. Okay? They're not the Politburo of China. Get out of the way. Your job is not to control the economy. The Fed's job is basically two things. Provide a stable dollar and support the hell out of that dollar.
Yes.
Okay? And stable interest rates.
Yes.
Not jacking them up and down because business people and banks can't keep up with this.
Like a year and a half, 2 years ago?
It takes us time to adjust our businesses, right? Yep. To what the Fed is doing. But they just snap their fingers and lower or raise interest rates and whatever. And then banks go bankrupt.
Yes.
Because they told them, hey, we're going to do this one thing 1 year. And then next month they change their mind and snap their finger, change interest rates.
Double interest
and those
rates.
Banks go bankrupt.
90 days later.
Right.
Banks.
Yeah. Signature Bank.
Yep.
Silicon Valley Bank.
Yep.
That's all because of the Fed. All of it.
And I heard there's a class action lawsuit amongst the banks going after the government right now.
They should.
Yeah.
Because they crushed these banks. Yes. They said, buy all these government bonds.
Yes.
And then they deflated those bonds, basically, disrupted their value by raising rates. You know what I mean? And they didn't give them advance warning. They shouldn't have told them to go buy all those in the first place.
Right.
But this is the government, right? They misdirect you to do something over here because they have an agenda over here that you're not aware of.
Right.
And as a result, then you pay the price, not them. They can blame the bankers and blame the
well, you over-leveraged.
Yeah, you did this or you
grew your business too fast.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Question for you, Terrence. I heard
Powell should resign.
Yeah, I agree.
And the president does have the right to replace Powell. He is not he is not a czar, an independent czar, answers to nobody. That is not true. Powell answers to the president who appoints him. And the president has the authority to remove anyone from office.
Well, who Because Jerome Powell's been in office for how many?
Well, Trump appointed him originally. So he's been in there for 11 years or so. No, 9 years, 8 to 9 years.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But, here's the thing. The Open Market Committee, they vote for their own chair. So the Fed chair can be removed by the president. That's the head of the Fed. The committee still gets to vote for their own chair. So they could keep Powell as chair of the committee for 1 more year. Right? Okay, fine. If they want to be dumb enough to do that. But the president has the right to remove the head of the Federal Reserve Bank. That's his constitutional right.
So he could fire Jerome now?
Yes, he could. And then the nerve of that guy to say that he will fight this. Who the hell does he think he is?
Right.
This is a democracy, and you listen to the guy who's voted in office. You didn't get voted in. You got appointed.
Exactly.
And the guy doesn't like you, he gets to remove you.
Yes.
That's the Constitution. That's the law.
And that's how a team works. You listen to your guy above you.
Right, exactly. And obviously, since the chairman has gotten things wrong consistently for the last 5 years, you think maybe he might want to step down because he ain't so smart about this whole thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Even a first grader can see some of this stuff. When you do this, this effect is going to happen.
Right.
And you could predict that was going to happen with the banks. Right. Obviously, Silicon Valley investors predicted it, and that's why they pulled their money out.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So it was highly predictable, but it is kind of disconcerting that
how our
somebody,
system works.
Yeah. Well, that somebody would say, you can't remove me from the office you appointed me to. How dare you? I'm going to fight you.
Right.
That worries me because that's not a democracy.
Right.
We elected a guy and he has the right to remove you. And that's one reason why we elected him. Because you messed up.
Right.
And yet the guy who messed up is saying, you can't remove me from office. That's bullshit.
Yeah.
And I don't know why Trump's being so patient with him. Maybe he's got other fights to...
He probably does.
Right?
He's trying to stop wars and things like that.
He's got his plates a little full right now.
The guy's nonstop.
Yeah.
Hey, question
Huge
for
energy.
you. In an interview with Trump years ago, he was speaking about his enemies, and he said he does believe in retaliation against his enemies and people that have done him wrong. And he says, I would like to hit them harder than they hit me. Do you believe in that type of philosophy, and why?
No, because, it's one thing on a national basis. The reason why he's saying that is because he's trying to get the terrorists and the crazies out in the world.
Well, this was
not attack him.
But this interview I'm speaking about was years ago in his 40s.
Okay.
When he's like a New York City, Manhattan businessman.
Yeah.
And
I think they treated him poorly, but
you've been in business deals where you've got screwed.
Yeah.
And so have I.
Right. And the reason why you don't want that philosophy is because it's like a cancer. It will eat you alive. Look, bad shit happens in business. You're going to get screwed once in a while. And in life. And you better just, as it comes along, you deal with it, you battle back. And you want to win and you want to move forward, but once you're moving forward and you've moved past this, to turn around and say, I'm going to retaliate, it's going to take time and resources, and it's going to take away from your success. To me, the best way to retaliate is success. So, for example, even though I wasn't able to get my justice imposed on the New Yorkers who stole my company.
Did a corporate takeover?
Right. I was able to come out on top, and my net worth is triple what it was then.
Do you ever
think that's my retaliation, right?
No, I
I'm
agree.
Successful. One of them has died already from cancer. I feel that's like his karma, right? And the other one had to sell the company and went into a bigger corporation. I don't know what that was about, but yeah, karma. Life's a circle.
Right.
It all comes around.
Right.
And I wouldn't focus too much on trying to get somebody back. I would move on and show your success. That's your best revenge.
Yes.
Is to show that you're successful. You're right because you became more successful and they were wrong. And they know it. You know what I mean, right? But if you spend your life trying to retaliate, you're going to burn up all your resources and your time.
Let me give you a scenario and you answer this.
You're going to be unhappy too.
I agree. And happiness, you got to move past things.
Right.
Let me give you a scenario. In 10 years, you're involved in politics at a federal level, let's just say, and you have an opportunity to rewrite corporate law that would not allow Wall Streeters to do corporate takeovers in a scenario that happened to you, or hundreds or thousands of other people.
Yeah.
Would you take that opportunity to shut down that law or those laws?
No, if I could pass a law, and be part of that so that it prevented the same thing from happening to other people, I would do that.
Right.
Because I'm trying to help other people,
right?
Especially Midwesterners who are hardworking, honest people who don't have the level of dishonesty and deceit and deviousness that, people apparently from New York tend to have,
Right.
You got to protect the hardworking people of America.
I agree.
Right? There are predators out there.
Right. And full circle back to the beginning of our conversation, what is America built on?
Yeah. Yeah. The hardworking Midwest.
Small business owners.
Yeah, small business people.
And if we don't protect that part of our country,
right,
it'll be like a Europe model where it'd be government and large corporations.
And that's what Wall Street wants.
Right.
They want that relationship because then they can control the entire economy.
It's all about control.
Yeah. I mean, no offense I like Apple products, but let's give an example. What's the only technology products that have continued to increase or stay high in price, even though years and years and years have gone by and the technology's gotten better and smaller and less expensive, but yet their prices remain sky high? Name the company.
Apple.
Yeah, exactly. And here we are. We love our products, right?
Well,
but their products don't go down in price, even though they should, because the technology has shrunk, the costs have shrunk. They keep their prices high. To me, that's just wrong.
Yeah.
I think if Steve Jobs was still around, I think maybe they might have a different policy.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because he really wanted to help people,
right,
improve people's lives. Right now, the bean counters over there, they just want to make as much money as possible.
For their shareholders.
Yeah. Well, and who are they? Really, it's for themselves.
Right.
To make their empire bigger so they can pay themselves more money.
Right.
It's not about the shareholders.
No, I agree with that to a point. And then I think if I was on an opposition of that, I would say, well, wait a minute. Apple built a brand that people want to always buy.
Yeah.
So you would have that counter argument. And then you would also say anything that's financeable is a high price. Real estate, cars, they made school financeable, college. People are spending 60, 80 grand a year.
It has a higher price. Yes. Right.
Well,
the price goes up.
And guess what? 10 years ago, I don't think you could have gotten a payment plan on this cell phone.
Yeah.
But now, we all pay $25 a month for this.
Yeah.
And I've never not had a cell phone payment. It's a part of our plan. When I go to AT&T, all my phone, they say, it's like
it's a standard monthly payment we make.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rather than, and why not? Because it's not really, it's the original sunk cost of the infrastructure that costs the money. It doesn't cost the money, whether I make 100 calls or 200 calls, it's not costing them anything different.
Right.
Okay. It's, maybe a pennies or two, but, remember when cell phones first came out, we paid by the number of calls.
You had a BlackBerry at one point.
Right. No, I didn't. I didn't have
one.
You didn't? No. I didn't like them.
What did you have?
Well, I had that brick phone, and then I went right to Apple phones as soon as they came out. I didn't like the BlackBerry. Everybody in business had a BlackBerry but me. I remember that.
I've never seen I got to look at these brick phones at some point.
Yeah. So, but the technology, the prices should come down for the consumer, right?
Software comes down over time. TVs come down over time.
Exactly. And so what does that tell you? They have monopoly power.
Right.
And if they have monopoly power, then maybe they should be looking at dismantling that monopoly.
I want to think about how we can play at their level and fight against them.
Well, good luck with that. They have all the money. They have the lawyers.
With your wisdom,
they have great products. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I have all Apple. I love the products, but it's very expensive.
I agree. Terrence, thank you again for sitting here. Mainline Armory, business, political talk.
Yeah, this is a great facility, by the way. And thanks for all your help. And it's been great. So hopefully somebody will learn something from this. And, I'm not perfect. I make a lot of mistakes.
Same here.
You're going to make a lot of mistakes. And that's just part of the process going forward.
Let's keep learning and executing.
Yeah, exactly. Executing. Hard work, persistence, grit. You'll make it happen.
I love it. See you guys later.